In this video, I want to talk about why it is bad to own bonds and good to own gold right now. Or more specifically, where the dangers lie in holding bonds in your portfolio and why a prudent investor might want to consider increasing their allocation to physical gold. If you're new to my channel, my name is Jared Ayers. I'm a CFA charter holder and I've been investing my own money for over 20 years now. Created this channel to share with anyone who's interested the thought processes, ideas, and strategies I use to invest my own money in the markets, and hopefully share a little bit of my lessons learned in terms of how I have navigated the markets in the past and where I think we are going in the future. I hope you enjoy. As a bit of background for those who are new to the asset class of bonds and the forces that influence their value, demand, supply obviously play a role, but also interest rates have a significant impact on bond values. So if demand for bonds is high relative to the supply, that drives up the value of bonds, but also at the same time lowers their yield or interest rate. At the same time, if there is a force in the market like the US Fed or other central banks influencing interest rates, as interest rates fall, bond values rise, and of course in the opposite turn, as interest rates rise, bond values fall. So there's sort of three forces at play when determining bond values in the market. So that's just a little bit of background before we jump into why bonds may not be the best thing to be holding in your portfolio at the moment. So now I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what's going on in the broader economy. So of course, as we all know, COVID-19 has gripped the planet. Everyone has basically stopped moving around, flights are being canceled, and the whole world is basically self-isolating, staying home, and trying to stop the spread of this horrible virus. At the same time, what that means, of course, as we've seen in oil and gas, we've seen in transportation, any kind of industry relating to travel, it's basically stopped, full stop. And what then the response of all that inactivity is from the central banks is to immediately cut interest rates. And that is in an effort to stimulate the economy, give borrowers and lenders also a break in terms of being able to keep the flow of money moving through the economy. Interest rates are of course already very low and are now of course near zero. So if you can no longer reduce interest rates, your only other option, if that isn't enough to stimulate the economy and get things moving again, is to what is known as basically put more liquidity into the market. You may have heard the term quantitative easing or bond buying. And this is something that not only the US Fed is participating in, but other central banks around the world. And effectively, the fear is that with that massive drop in the economy, the fear is that banks, which need to lend to one another in order to kind of keep the flow of funds moving through the economy, if they seize up and stop lending to one another, then that can create a whole other issue, collapsing of markets, etc. So what the Fed and other central banks have decided to do is basically, a lot of those banks hold different types of bonds, namely government bonds, but also corporate bonds and whatnot. So what the Fed and others have decided to do is basically buy back those bonds that those banks hold and replace them with credit, or basically reserves. Another way to think of that is just basically giving them money in exchange for those bonds, which then they can use to lend to one another, as they now have more reserves, and they have to have sort of a minimum amount of reserves at all times in order to keep things flowing. So in that effort of bond buying, the central banks and whatnot are basically trying to keep the flow of funds moving, but at the same time, so effectively what that means is they're trying to keep demand for those bonds high and interest rates low. And what that also helps to do is when the government has to issue more debt, interest rates remain low, and that debt can be issued at sustainably low interest rates or seemingly sustainably low interest rates. However, at some point, that bond buying in order to keep interest rates low can get a little bit out of control, and that cash that they're replacing those bonds with also gets a little bit out of control, and you get into a point where central banks, U.S. Fed or others, end up printing money faster than they really can keep up with, and what you get then into potentially is a situation of hyperinflation where you're basically devaluing your currency due to this quantitative easing or bond buying. Now it's of course, it may sound like a good idea. It's in the name of stimulating an economy, but if that economy was already weak to begin with, and you had a ton of debt and a ton of cash out there already, and if you have something like COVID-19, which is basically bringing the world to its knees in terms of economic activity, how long can you sustain that kind of money printing and stimulus before you get into a point where it's basically you've devalued currency so far that you get into hyperinflation. Basically the purchasing power of a dollar drops significantly and prices just go through the roof. So and that has a knock-on effect across basically all bond markets. So at some point you won't be able to continue that, and ultimately the demand for bonds may in fact fall, interest rates may go through the roof at the same time as inflation. So just a little bit of warning and background on quantitative easing and the response to this type of stimulus or activity in the markets. So that then brings us to the question of, okay, so I've got bonds in my portfolio, why is that a bad thing? So if in fact the central governments are keeping interest rates low by keeping bond values high by artificially increasing the demand for bonds, and if that is in fact unsustainable and at some point the values of those bonds drop, that means the value of any bond you hold in your portfolio may also collapse. It doesn't matter if it's a corporate bond, treasury bond, or other central government bond. Even municipal bonds, there's nothing that's going to be untouched, but basically if you currently hold something that's of high value and the only place for it to go is down, at the same time, of course, if they drop, interest rates will go through the roof. But keep in mind, if you hold a bond, your interest that you're earning on that bond is fixed, so it doesn't change, right? You're not gonna, if you're getting $100 a month in interest for a bond, that doesn't change because interest rates change, but the value of your bond does if interest rates change. So that's one cautionary note, is really in this environment, if there's only downside potential, and that's really the only potential I see because of this artificial inflation of bond values, then really bonds are probably the most dangerous place to be at this point in time. Certainly once you do see a collapse in the market and bond values collapsing with it, interest rates going through the roof, then that's a time when you actually want to be adding bonds to your portfolio when the values have dropped. Just like anything, you want to buy low and sell high. You do not want to buy high and then watch the whole asset value collapse. So that's really kind of the main point I want to make in this video, is you actually do not want to be holding bonds at all in terms of a safe haven. If anything, you want to be out of them entirely and waiting for a safer entry point at some point down the line. Now, I don't know when that is. Could be 5 months, could be 5 years, it could be, I don't even know, right? This whole thing is probably, well, I don't know of anyone who has seen anything like this in their lifetime, and we don't know where it's going to go, but history has shown us that when you get into too much debt and you try to stimulate economies the way the government is doing right now, already on the back of probably what wasn't really a healthy economy to begin with because of what happened in '08 and all of the debt creation and quantitative easing that's happened since then really I think it's time to rethink where you want to be allocating your portfolio as we sit here in April of 2020. So now that we've covered off why bonds are such a horrible place to be right now, I want to talk about an asset class that I think is worth looking at more closely, and that is gold. So of course we've seen over history, and there's a lot of people that will say, well, you don't want to hold gold. It doesn't really do anything for you. It doesn't grow. It doesn't pay a yield. It doesn't do anything physically to increase its value. It's not even used in a productive capacity in terms of construction or anything like that, which can be an argument that you can make for silver. I think one of the benefits of gold, of course, is that there is only a limited amount of it, and over centuries and even millennia, it's been regarded as a very valuable metal. If nothing, if for nothing else, then it's sort of pure appearance appeal, but also from an investment standpoint, it's also been a safe haven for people to go to when there is uncertainty in the market. We saw that, of course, in 2010, 11, when gold went up to about $2,000 an ounce, and I think we're about to see that happen again here in the near future. Don't know when. Don't know if it's 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years. But at the same time, I think with currencies being devalued due to money printing, gold being a physical and limited quantity, I think it stands, as it has in the past, to rise with inflation. If we look back to the 1970s, when when inflation was very high, gold also happened to be taken off the standard in terms of the U.S. dollar. Gold increased at a total of about 10 times or more over that decade. As inflation rose, and then of course at the end there with very high interest rates into the early 80s, gold held its purchasing power for its owners, and I think that's why you really want to consider owning at least a good chunk of it in your portfolio at this time. I think it's going to help hedge the inevitable inflation that we're going to see, and devaluation of currencies and purchasing power along with that. And I think it's very also should note that physical gold is really the preferred form of ownership. So whether that's physical coins or bars, or if you have to own paper, then making sure that paper security is tied to physical gold held in a vault somewhere, and that security is a claim against that physical gold. The gold futures market, I think, has more contracts than there is physical gold to honor those contracts. I think it's a speculator's market, and I think owning any security that's tied to those futures contracts is just as dangerous as owning bonds these days. So that's just a note as well. So, take it for what it is. There's going to be people that maybe disagree with me, but I think from a prudent standpoint, now I think more than ever you want to consider adding gold to your portfolio on weakness, and not being afraid to increase the total allocation to gold, physical gold, in your portfolio. So I hope you found that video useful. Again, everything I present in my videos is my opinion, but by all means do your own research if you want to follow anything that I'm presenting in my videos. If you did like this video, please give me a thumbs up, hit the like button. If you are new to my channel and have not yet subscribed but want to see similar content going forward, by all means hit the subscribe button. And if you want to leave any comments or have any questions about anything I covered in this video, please feel free to leave those in the comment section as well. Until next time, thank you very much for watching.